kid.
Yeah.
Whenever she's back.
Yeah.
Like in the simulation.
I guess that'll help.
Oh,
So you're supposed to bring your baby to the.
Just take it away, Dan. Yeah. Start babbling on.
Your child would like ticket, and they have to go to their.
Never miss.
And he's gonna share the presentation.
Right. Like,
All the time.
and this is, what do I do?
But yes, they do have kids enough of it. It's like, oh, it's okay. Right.
Right.
Set aside. I don't really get transferred. We did it a couple years ago.
Well, and I don't know what you're gonna do. You might have to just plan.
Yeah, I mean,
I reckon.
Much is going in first of all, you hate that.
Maybe you should just do it.
That's certainly not.
Ready?
Jump in whenever you're ready.
Perfect. Yeah, let's get going here. I apologize. I just realized I left my laptop at the office, so whatever, I grabbed my backpack, but it has my computer in it, so not that I need it anyway, but if my head wasn't attached, I probably would have forgot that. But anyway, thank you all for joining. Tonight we do have Sam virtual is our only virtual person this evening. Chris unfortunately is home with a fever, so this is our crew today. So I'm going to hit.
It is recording already,
Oh.
Sam. Got it to go.
Okay,
Pretty much. You can
perfect.
share your screen. I think you need to share.
Share
it.
first.
Oh, yeah.
Doesn't matter what one I do.
So, is it the chart, not the template? So yeah, go back up screen. And
So, as you all have received the intent of our meeting tonight is to talk about the draft plan that you all have in front of you. So, what we'll go through is rather than going in chapter order, we're gonna kind of go through and step through in kind of some areas where we have some bigger policy changes or recommendations, starting with those at the front end of what we're talking about, just so we make sure we reserve the good brain power that we're starting with, and hopefully the pizza will carry us through as we get through all 11 chapters here as well. But again, the intent of our meeting here tonight is to, chat about the things that we'd like to see changes within the plan. For those of you that have been a part of other plans as well, if you have little word changes, grammatical things you found, little small things like that, we can talk about them here as well. But those are things that you can easily send us over in an email and we can get addressed here. The big piece that we want to make sure that we're hitting on at this time, especially before we enter into the public comment period, is making sure that the policies, guidance, direction that we've identified in this plan makes sense to all of you and the roles that you play in the community, because the next phase of this process is we're going to go back, spend the next week making sure that the plan is updated based on our conversations and comments here and get it ready for public review. So that's really the intent of where we're at tonight. That all being said, like I mentioned, that we're going to spend the next week making updates. So if there are things that you forget to say tonight and we need to go back and update, we've got a little bit of time there. But the intention is for this plan to go live for the public on February 6th via Engage RF. So before we entered in, and apologize for you council members that saw this already on Tuesday, but wanted to just kind of remind us all of the process of where we're at as well. So the bike and pedestrian plan and outdoor recreation plan, of course, you have already taken action on those elements or on those plans, but they are publicly available at this time. So they are available on Engage RF. Kind of as a soft launch, and there are paper copies available upstairs and at the library as well. So those are out there for people to interact with and engage with. We will do the same thing with the comprehensive plan after we make updates per our conversation here tonight, with having everything be live on February 6th, from that plan being available and things of that nature. So again, we've got our conversation here tonight. We will go out to the public in February, come back to you on the 7th of March, and allow you to take action and we'll have the public hearing. We are required by state statute to do a public hearing on the plans. We will do that at your March meeting, and then all 3 plans will go out to the council for their action and adoption at the end of March, should they so choose. So just wanted to do that ground setting and give you a quick update on the status of those other 2 plans.
From tonight and February 6th, will we be able to see the plan again?
We can, I mean, I would say that probably not in its totality, but if there are specific sections where we are making some big updates and we need to review, we could talk about what that looks like, but you know, there's not a lot of time between now and the 6th.
Right.
So, and it's the intent is it's still a big, you know, draft, you know, from that standpoint. So, you know, obviously we want it to be as complete as we can for the public, but so the thing I would say is that if we're talking tonight and the future land use plan has a big glaring thing in it that we need to go back and make some tweaks on, then we'll go back and do that as quickly as we can so we can get it back out to you. But it would only be those types of things that I would want to necessitate that level of review with us, is if there's something big that we have to change.
Okay.
So these chapters I have also all gone through staff review ahead of what you saw, what was presented to you as well. So staff, different levels of staff, and have reviewed the different chapters of the plan as well, with edits made from that perspective. The other piece that I would add here too is making sure that there are, from a formatting perspective, and we did the same thing with the outdoor recreation plan, there will be some additional photos and refined formatting that are done in the document that goes out to the public. So you may see additional page breaks and things like that come into play for just a public understanding, but we're trying to keep this condensed and things in there as well. So I don't know if you have anything to add. Okay.
I think so. Perfect.
Okay. So let's jump into it then. So just again to ground us in the 11 chapters that we have presented are in front of you. So again, we have those 9 required plan elements plus recreation, and then the introduction chapter to ground us and kind of serve as that summary of why we do this, what it means, all of those pieces. The appendices that are referenced here are all things that you've already reviewed. So the early engagement summary, you've already taken a look at that. The community context document that we were looking at almost a year ago now are components of that appendix, but the technical memorandums that were included on the second half of the 275-page PDF that you received will be considered as part of that appendix. And again, as a reminder there, that's a lot of the more detailed technical information that really speaks to us as planners or you as plan commissioners, but so provides that backup information that can be more easily updated if we need to, and then the chapters themselves feed off of that content and information as well. So that's, you got that part of the appendices. We didn't give you the other pieces because again, we've already reviewed them, and who needs another 100 pages or whatever it is on top of what we already sent you. So so we will, rather than going in order, you know, in chapter order, we are going to start the conversation actually in almost reverse order. We'll start with implementation at a high level, talk about land use, because that's, again, the area where, that's the whole reason why we have a comprehensive plan, is to form those land use decisions, make sure that we like those policies and the direction we're heading there. And then we'll kind of go through chapter by chapter as well. So before we jump in, I didn't have any specific content in this presentation about the introduction, but just to start us off again, the introduction is in there to what is a comprehensive plan, what does it include, why do we do it, and then trying to highlight the engagement process that was done as part of it. So trying to have that sit as a little bit of an executive summary from that perspective. So any additional or initial reactions, thoughts, comments to introduction, just so I don't forget that chapter. It's the easy one. I like to start out with a win, so. Perfect, okay. Then I wanted to jump to the goals chapter actually to start us off. And of course, this is important for us to recognize because it is the goals and those foundational elements that directed us to what we wanted to look at within the chapter or within each of the chapters in the sections as well. And so these goals have been an evolving process or, an evolving element throughout the entirety. I think we started at a max point of 13 goals, and through the process, we're able to refine and get us down to 6 goals that have really been informing the process. And as a result, with the 6 that we're at, they are much more concise, and they actually, rather than having one goal that's really specific to transportation, we're hitting on transportation and housing and economic development within the different goal statements and things of that nature. The other new piece that might be new when you read this was that we kind of have a tag or a phrase that we can associate with each of these. And this was a fun exercise to go through when we were looking at the intent or purpose behind each of the goal statements, because it brought back some of those foundational words that we talked about as we were summarizing the initial engagement. So things like connection, access, resiliency in our resources, those were, you've heard me say it multiple times, those are the key cornerstones of things that we heard from the community that were really important to them and wanting to make sure we maintain and invested in those areas. So it was a really gratifying thing to go back and identify these tags or themes for each of these goal statements and have those words reappear. That means that we did a good job in making sure that we were listening to the public from that perspective. So that was a lot for me to talk about there, but any initial thoughts, reactions to the revised 6 goal statements, the format of that section, anything related to chapter 2? Okay.
6 is a lot more doable, I think, than the laundry list you had before.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Like you say, it's the cornerstones, and then it's, the livability of the partnership are just the why and the how, kind of.
And I think it's really great too, because with these themes or tags, you can use them in a different, you can go in and dig into what the goal statement is or the key themes, there's content on each page themselves, but it also allows us to, think really broadly, to use the goal of connection or the goal of livability, more broadly too in some of our marketing and things like that. So the one last piece that we will do, and it's referenced in here, but we will highlight a couple of key implementation strategies on some of these in these tables. We just wanted to make sure that we'll get that added here as we're getting it ready for the public review, just to make sure those strategies didn't change and then we, missed something there from getting it updated. Okay. Excellent. Okay, we'll keep rolling. So then we'll go all the way to the end of the chapter now, the 2 bookends of our goals and then the implementation actions. So this is a really important chapter because it's really what's telling us, or what we should be doing to help achieve those 6 goal statements and themes that we identified. So we spent a meeting talking about what this the kind of layout or organization of the implementation chapter should be, and we were really excited to get to the kind of the layout or format that you see in front of you here. But we did make sure that our implementation plan organizes those actions around the plan elements. So we found that was helpful in terms of somebody's really interested in housing. They can kind of go to those different areas where they feel most connected. So there was purpose in organizing them in that way. But I think the really exciting parts about kind of this structure are the tools that it provides staff, but also provides, organizations and committees like yourselves and the council for how some of these things can be prioritized down the road. Because some of these things are going to be, this is supposed to be a 20-year plan horizon. So these are things that are, 20 years from now. Dan's no longer going to be our mayor, and somebody else will be 2 or 3 mayors down the road at that time. But it, you know, so we went away from the standard, you know, timeline or things like that, and really focused in on what goals does this action specifically support? So you'll see that varied throughout. And then the inclusion of the complexity and benefit really help us to understand and look at, okay, how hard is this going to be to complete? Is this a big dollar value? Is it something that we are going to be working with a lot of partners and things to achieve? It's worth it, but it's going to be more complex. And then what is the benefit, or really how does it help us move towards achieving the six goals or 4 goals, 5 goals that we've established? So it can kind of, you know, the low hanging fruit pieces are those things that are a complexity of 1 and, you know, the high benefit of 3, but kind of allows you to look through that space as well. And then made sure from a community partner perspective, we tried to keep that higher level. So we didn't leave anybody out, and we allow for change to occur, new organizations to emerge. But this is an area where we've got some partners, and the city can't be responsible for doing all of this in a box. It's going to take the community to support. And then also the lead division or department and lead committee was intentional in the sense that when planning is doing their work plan for the next year, they could take the comprehensive plan out and look through some of the things that are identified under planning and what do we want to take action on over the next year. So trying to use it as that tool. But the intent there too is it's not that planning is going to do it in a box either, but they might be the lead. They're the ones that could be tasked with things there as well. So we're not going to go through page by page of the implementation plan because we would be here for a very long time and we'd need another order of pizza for us to do that. But maybe before we just talk about things in general, any comments, reactions to this structure?
What a great way to visualize that. I mean, it's really easy for somebody who doesn't live in this every single day. It's a great way to look at all these complex issues, and it's just great. I love it. Excellent. Well done.
Thank you.
I guess I just have one comment about the complexity of, and we're kind of putting a few things in there. And so when you see the complexity, and we know we're talking about cost or other partnerships, it's not evident, you know, when you just see the scale. Why is it because it costs too much, or is it have to do with regulation or partnership or whatever? And I suppose if you look further, you probably find a breakout explanation, but I thought, would it be better to have maybe cost separated, or does that become too complicated, or do you put a dollar sign in a dot to say that?
Talked about this at our work Tuesday night.
Okay.
But the dollar sign doesn't really tell you we need these partners for it.
Yeah.
You know, the dollar signs are
Not put cost in there yet.
Okay,
and not having a timeline, I like that idea as well, just because it's not a matter of we need to get this done in 3 to 5 years. It's a matter of
Are you gonna go over the,
low hanging fruit.
what, explain, like you did on Tuesday, it explains this is medium, this is high, this is low, this is something we can, I can't remember what the hell it's called.
Yeah, I don't have those slides in because those are specific to the bike and pedestrian plan, but that's a good point so the bike and pedestrian plan takes the complexity and the priority is the word that they used in that plan.
Yeah.
And when we have something that's a low complexity and a high priority, then it's a low hanging fruit. As I kind of mentioned and went through those things. The thing that makes the comp plan harder is the scale of the implementation actions are so varied because we're talking, so that, and admittedly, it was a really hard exercise to go through and say what the benefit is an easy piece, right? I mean, relatively speaking, but when you're talking about a simple text amendment to the zoning ordinance, you know, as simple as you can say they are, that requires, you know, a couple of hours of these, you know, great planners' time and then bringing it to you. That's not really all that complex unless we get the public excited about something versus, you know, some of the implementation of the Kinney corridor plan, for example, where we're working with the Corps and there's millions of dollars at stake. When we only have 3 dots, when we're trying to simplify this, it's really those are apples and oranges. And so it's, and then, then when you try to put the dollar value to some of those things as well, again, we're already paying these planners for their time. So in some ways, it's just using something that we're already paying for versus where we have to, so that's where it becomes, I totally get your point, but we're trying to give this into a space where we could visually kind of represent it and still make it make sense. But I think the one piece that, to build on this, that Scott brought up at the workshop on Tuesday, specifically asking council to look at both this plan and the bike and pedestrian plan, is like looking at those 3 levels and making sure, probably more on the priority or benefit side, to making sure that these were things that should be a level 3 priority or benefit, because they will be, the way that this is set up is it gives staff a tool to go back and say, when they're working on their work plan, hey, I've got 3 high benefit items on my list, 2 are low complexity and 1 is high complexity. That seems to fit well with the workload that we would have for the year. But it's making sure that we all, that council or others agree with kind of what that classification is as well.
Was there anything that you didn't see on the list? I mean, that has been on your mind, and because I always think about you bringing up ADUs 3 years ago, and ADUs are there, but I don't know if there's other things that folks are thinking about that they didn't see. And it's okay if not, it's just.
Yeah. And, of course, I think that this is one section too that, can be amended, and it's not that this says is the be all end all, right? These are things that specifically came out of this process. There's going to be other things that spur off of actions and come up and things like that. So, but yeah, so I think, if one thing, if you wanted to take a look through here, and if you only had time to, if we were looking at the complexity and benefit, or, that list of things, but yeah, so. Okay, excellent. Let's keep moving then to land use, the big old chapter in the plan. Again, that, reason why we have a comprehensive plan. So I think the way that we've structured this presentation is to really not get into all of the details or the structure of each chapter, but what are those key policy, new idea pieces that we want to make sure resonate for everyone. As we walk through this, if there are other things that I don't have on a slide that are important for you to bring up that you recognize, this is the time where we need to talk about those things. So make sure that anything that I want to bring up, we talk about here. But the land use chapter itself, of course, the key piece that we have to have in there is that future land use plan. That is a key piece for us. That's, probably the thing that gets referred back to the most as we're making zoning decisions. And so there's a couple of pieces that are kind of policy shifts in this comprehensive plan update that then create the resulting future land use plan that we have in front of us. So to hit that at kind of a high level, and we've talked about these things, so thinking back a few months when we started to talk about our land use categories and how we were organizing those land use categories, we've tried to make some simplifications to the number of categories that we had and some of those things. But we also took opportunities to look at how our residential works together. And again, we increased that residential density across our categories, where before we had a max of 12 units per acre in our highest density residential category, where now our high density residential starts at 12 units per acre. So we changed up what that density mix is going to be. As a result, in the implementation plan, we have an action where we need to update our zoning ordinance to make sure that it allows us to do those things, not only from just a density requirement, but that our lot sizes allow us to do those things as well. And then from a physical location standpoint, we really tried to emphasize again that connection back to the core of that's where we're going to put a lot of that higher density is back in where we have existing infrastructure and some of those pieces. But then also from the land use side, We also introduced that mixed use development or mixed use category. We all spent a lot of time talking about how we format that, what is the right mix to get us to the singular mixed use category that we have included. And that's also a great piece. It's something that, you know, builds off of the Kinney corridor plan that was already talking about mixed use. Now the comprehensive plan has that tool in place to help us achieve some of what's in the Kinney corridor plan as well. I think the other piece that I wanted to hit on the future land use plan, and then I plotted a couple copies for us to chat about as well, is the updates to the urban area boundary. We talked about this as well. The comprehensive plan does not statutorily have the authority to change our ETZ boundaries, for example, but we do have a tool in place that's in the current plan that has that urban area boundary that really is setting where we're looking at for growth. So we did make some expansions of that urban area boundary. So there are areas now in this updated future land use plan that have a future land use designation that didn't before. So maybe with that to kind of help start us in the conversation, and I plotted them bigger because I know it's helpful to be able to see from a larger standpoint. But maybe in some of those ground setting pieces that we've already talked about, any questions, reactions from anyone on some of those bigger policy shifts related to increased density in the residential categories, or questions about how we shifted the urban area boundary or things?
Well, I just have a question with regard to the projected growth. And we have here, by combining this development that you were just talking about, our growth would require 105 housing units per year. That's as of when, I mean, is there a backup, or because we've got on Powell Road, we've got over almost 400 between the 4 different units going in the next year. But you're saying, but this is not you're saying, this is saying 105 housing units each year.
Yeah, so that is based on just some raw planning numbers from the standpoint of we set our population projections early in this process, right? And we used the kind of historic growth rates over the last 20 years to set where we're going to be by 2045. We also had to make an assumption about what the average household size is going to be, and that's of course an ever evolving piece. So we used historic information to say that there are
2.4.
2.4, okay, thank you. I didn't know the number off the top of my head. You know, 2.4, yeah, but 2.4 people per household, which that means, so population increase of X by 2.4, that means we needed this number of households, and on average, that would be, 100. Now, I think the thing in play is like right now, yes, housing market is hot, we're able to get things. There's going to be, I was just talking to my realtor, a housing recession again, coming up. We're gonna go through that again, so we might not even hit that 100 mark. So that's where that average is, just what that average is over that 20-year span.
Is there a concern about a glut when they're just now breaking ground on these? So
Sure.
They'll be done in like 3 years. Will we end up with a bunch of empty apartments?
I don't think so,
Okay.
based on what the housing need is right now. I don't think that's a worry, especially if you look at what the newest housing study is saying. We're in need. We could have used those units.
So this 105 is gonna come into play way down there.
Yeah, and that's just an average perspective. So just meant to be a little bit of a tool there. That's a good question.
In fact, if we have a glut of houses, it will bring the housing costs down.
Yes.
So, then presumably more people will be able to live here.
Yeah, when you can get to a little bit more of a normal vacancy rate, that's a good thing. From an affordability standpoint. But any other thoughts, comments, questions on the kind of those foundational components that we were talking about? The plan, of course, gets into what's the description of those different categories. Okay, perfect. So yeah, in front of you is that future land use plan. I think we've presented and talked about this a while ago, but there's been some changes and things of that nature in there. So there's a lot of components, particularly in the commercial, corporate park, industrial, where we, if you compare this to the future land use plan, are not much of a change. We're recognizing what's there, there's maybe some infill spaces or things like that, so there's not a ton of change from that perspective. There probably may be some things that feel different in existing residential areas because we did go in and calculate what those densities are, not on a lot by lot basis, but on a block basis. So you may see some changes in some of those things, but we also have areas where we did create an opportunity for change and increased density as well. So I think, the one example of that would be 3rd Street, as we're kind of bordering, that mixed use area. Now, again, you all know that if we show a change on here, it doesn't mean that that's an immediate change. They have to go in as if a property owner decides they want to make a change, then we look back at what that guidance is, right? So we all know those pieces, but so that's a little bit of how we handle things within the core of the city. Obviously, that mixed use category, there's a lot of it, which is not a bad thing because it's something that provides us flexibility. And again, the description of mixed use allows us to think it doesn't just mean commercial ground floor residential above. It can mean things as much as a townhouse or some row homes with a coffee shop on the end would be mixed use. The thing is, we've kind of left that description pretty broad. How that turns into what we're actually allowing through the zoning ordinance will happen through implementation. So that is a key step of the implementation plan, is setting the regulatory framework for what we actually want to see. I think the other piece, that will come into play there is we were specific that Main Street, that within our downtown, that's where we want that traditional mixed use, commercial ground floor, residential above. But everywhere else, there's opportunities for us to play with that. So, particularly along Main and kind of through the core of the community, really looked at, and that's where we focused a lot of this mixed use growth. This does align with the guidance of the Kinney Corridor Plan as well. So making sure that we were taking a look at areas that had mixed use there, got carried over here. And then we also have some mixed use areas on the east side of campus. They're just based on transportation network and serving the university and CBTC kind of pieces there as well. Now, maybe I'll pause there. Any thoughts, comments, reactions on what's within city limits, or questions about how we came up with what we came up with?
I like that you're not, you're making it very easy to, what's what I'm looking for, change as we go along for, so we're not picking on ourselves and, this is all we really want here, this is all we really want here. You'll keep it broad enough for us to change as we go. I think you did a great job there. Because who knows what's gonna happen 2 years from now when it comes to development, let alone 5, 10, 15 years.
So different opportunities, including where you're talking about putting your hairdressing salon attached to your home on 3rd Street or whatever the case may be. It's like you almost see more of that just for the costs and affordability, so.
Yep, and that is an implementation action that's in, I think, the economic development section about looking at our home occupations and making sure that that's revised and allows kind of the current trend in the market as well. Perfect. I think the other piece, and just putting this out there, I'm sure you all know it too, but particularly from a park and public institutional, even especially as we transition to talking about the areas outside or growth areas outside of city limits, those are areas that are hard for us. We tend to try to not specify those areas because unless we know that the next elementary school is going in a specific location, we don't want to hinder the school district from being able to purchase cheaper property or, property that makes more sense. So it's kind of assumed that those just aren't really there unless it's things that we are aware of, or we're maintaining, the campus farm or, something like that. So.
Oh, yeah, think that's that land they use, they own.
Okay.
So then as we go and expand outside of city limits and look at these growth areas where we have statutory authority to be doing land use planning, zoning, subdivision in these areas. So we wanted to, part of the reason why we've shown it in the hatching is just to make sure that we're communicating that difference of city limits versus, so you kind of see that key line there. But here, of course, they're assigned to the current parcel structure, but it, obviously through subdivisions and things would change what that looks like. But have some big blocked areas for what type of growth that we'd like to direct and see in those areas. So relatively this self-explanatory, you've all gone through this before. We were thoughtful in a couple of areas that I just want to call out for a conservation land use and piece like that. We did identify a couple of key areas that we want to make sure are preserved from a resource stewardship perspective, or they're just not things that could really be incorporated well into development. So, they probably just naturally become our conservancy zoning or things like that, but just being thoughtful about some of what those barriers might be to growth. I think the other piece that I wanted to call out was this urban growth preservation area that's here in the southwest kind of quadrant. So this is an area that's currently, the urban area boundary has not changed. That's currently in our growth planning area, but due to the just existing conditions, the natural resources in that area, we wanted to keep it as a potential growth area, but didn't want to be too specific in what those land uses are, because they're going to kind of have to be a work in progress. So the intent of that area is to say, it's not, we're open to talking about things here, but it's going to require a different level of planning, allow us to kind of work through. And that's also an ever changing and evolving area as we're making other decisions, is going to impact how that all works. It's also not an area that's not super connected from an existing transportation network and might cost us a lot to get connectivity to that area. So that is also a new thing for that area that we didn't have in there. If we visited the current plan from that perspective. Am I missing anything from
I don't know that you're missing anything, but I guess just some key things from my perspective. We did expand the urban growth boundary. We are never going to develop that amount of land within this time period, but we did that to allow us flexibility because we don't have control over annexation and we never know where it's going to come from. So that was the reason for that expansion. Within the city, I just want you to be keenly aware of that densification in the core. So if you zone in and look at those core neighborhoods, everything south of Maple and east of North Fremont has the potential to not be single family anymore. And it's the same on the east side of me as well. That's expanded a bit too. So I just want you to know that. I don't want, I want you to know that up front going in.
How many of them currently in that area are already, I don't want to say college rentals, but how much of the old west side, as we think of it, really is single family dwelling anymore?
Yeah. We haven't mapped out the numbers.
Yeah, but I just, when you think about it, years past, and now you're looking, it's like, that's rental, that's students, and that's this, and.
Yeah, and that is, some of our older housing stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Purchased and.
some of the stuff that might be, maybe renovated first.
Yeah.
And it's also from a density perspective, if you think about those accessory dwelling units that do increase, we're not going to keep the existing affordable housing, but you add in another option, in there, or you can convert it to a, 2-unit versus a single family home.
Well, and it also dovetails with, the bike and ped plan wanting to have a very walkable corridor, for as many people. Yeah.
Density.
It also changes both of our golf courses, potentially.
Yes. This is true.
Yes. How do they feel about that?
Well, I don't know how. So their current future land use
Oh,
plan
yeah,
has their
future.
current golf course within the city as part.
Yeah.
So that's the definition. Medium density.
So, and of course, especially when we look at the growth boundary, the opportunities out here, these lines don't have to be as hard cut as in here as well. It's kind of just a guidance component, yeah. But we were thoughtful about our areas here, we have medium here. That medium density category still allows us to have single family homes. That medium category isn't just fourplexes, row homes, things. You could achieve single family homes on a smaller scale. And when we're thinking about how to regulate that density, again, it's not on a lot by lot basis. We can look at it from a subdivision or block basis. So that allows us to look at things like Sterling Ponds, where we've got our more traditional, single family lots to, that mix. So it allows us to really think, not pigeonhole us into different spaces and provide that diversity, which is something that helps us achieve the goals of the housing chapter as well. Okay, so I think the other piece with this, to kind of tag on to Amy's point of, we're not going to use all of this area within the horizon of the plan, or at least the forecast of what our population projection that we have for 2045. But we chose not to. You'll see in some other comprehensive plans where they have like a phasing plan where it says, here's our first, we want, all of our growth is going to be here for the first 10 years and then we'll move up here, things like that. We made the decision to not have a phasing plan because we didn't want to handcuff us into one area or another. Another key piece of implementation for the utilities chapter is a utility infrastructure plan. Okay, now that we have this future land use plan, what does that mean for infrastructure? Where do we need to be making investments? When will we need that, next upgrade to a system or things like that? And without that piece, it's kind of hard for us to specifically say where we want to go. So those two plans should be used in tandem once that one's developed to say, okay, developer, yes, we allow that level of density here, but in order for you to achieve that, you're going to have to pony up some cash to help us X, Y, and Z here. So,
Perfect.
am I missing from your perspective anything? Perfect. Any thoughts, comments?
I just look at how the market really dictates that. You were just talking about not having to be too rigid because of the market. We're always kind of in a balance. We have a vision of what we'd like to see, but then we don't know what the market is 10 years from now. And even technology and types of housing stock and kinds of housing that people will want 10 years from now, it could change, so that's why I like that flexibility and that we're not handcuffed.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason why we have the land use categories as we have them too. It allows us some flexibility in there as well and allows you to work with developers to not only help them achieve what they want, but make sure that the city gets what you want out of it too. Okay. So I think the other piece to go along with this, and let me just, I'll go through my slides here, but I think we talked about a lot of it. We talked about that. From a development regulation perspective, and this is an area where it's maybe not as more specifically talked about in land use plan, but filters into a lot of the other components as well. But there are some specific implementation actions where we want to be thinking about the look and feel of development, right? That plan that's in front of you tells you where things can go, but there is a piece that we have regulatory authority to, setbacks and building, materials and all of those things. So we want to make sure that we're thinking about, what that looks like. That takes us back to the, community identity and sense of place and kind of establishing who that is or who we are. And so there are some very specific implementation actions that get us to, again, the comprehensive plan doesn't tell you what those regulations have to be. That's the planning process that will come out of here as an implementation action, is to look at establishing new performance standards across all of our categories. So where do we, what do we want to be looking at? Are there performance standards for downtown? Are there performance standards that are different for a corporate park or things of that nature? And then also potentially looking at form-based zoning concepts that are, a little different than our standard Euclidean zoning that we currently are working with right now. So that thinks about a little bit more of the form and of the building, how it relates to things, and less about the specific use. Anyway, but planning terminology there. And then the last piece I wanted to hit on here is that concept of community connectivity. And this is something that gets carried through a lot of the other concepts as well. Diane mentioned the connection to the bike ped plan and making sure that that network works. So we were thoughtful when we laid out the future land use plan about the relationship between these different zoning areas or different land use areas to, and kind of, trying to bring people back in, that you don't have to go too far to potential commercial use or things like that, that there's opportunities for us to cluster, not employment isn't all located in, one area where we all have to move, but there's opportunity from that perspective. And I think that's also important when we're thinking about some of the key pieces that came out of economic development related to workforce development and, having a workforce. If I have housing here where I live that I can afford, and some of those things, they all come together from that perspective as well. So any other thoughts, comments, questions on the land use chapter itself?
I guess I had a question about I think I saw maybe a sneak preview of the next slide. Is it the missing middle?
Yes.
And, how do we, the plan doesn't seem to say, indicate that we should be, say, as mentioned, we have to have 100 and, keep on track of 105 houses. I came up with 130, I don't know why. But saying, okay, we should have a percentage should be of those homes should be addressing the missing middle.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the challenge is the market,
Right.
So is that something that communities are doing and saying, in order to get that, is to say when we do have development, we're courting development and asking developers to come in and fill that so we can meet a quota? Or, that was just something on my mind when I went through the plan, and maybe you could address that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think the piece is from the comp plan perspective and the longevity, we try to shy away from specifics like that because that's an evolving policy. So I think when we get into the implementation of developing the housing policies or changing those, that's something that, especially as we're looking at the fresh data that came out of the recent housing needs assessment, that would be something that should be used as a tool as staff is saying, okay, here's how we're approaching housing. The comprehensive plan wants us to make sure that we're thinking about missing middle for how we're going to tackle that. Here's, we're putting a percentage based on it. And it's a hard thing because it's for everything. How much detail do we put in, like that level of detail? And so we were trying to make sure that this is a plan that gives you enough of insight in where to be looking, but doesn't create a barrier, unintentional barrier.
It just identifies the issue.
Yes.
That you should address,
Yeah.
then go address it in a more particular plan.
Yeah. So, and I think, one way from an implementation standpoint, particularly with the missing middle, is that we've got a developer that's coming in and they're, looking at even just an area within the median density, they might come in and just have the biggest lots that they can to have single family that still meets that density. Well, through the application process, is there an opportunity to say, hey, there's, do you have any interest in putting in a different kind of housing type that would allow you to have some higher lot sizes over here, or things like that. So it's a way for us to kind of use it in that as well. Okay, well, maybe I'll just move into housing then here too. So
Yeah, sorry, I can't.
it's okay. It's all good. All good. So I think on the, and I apologize for standing up and moving around, but it's the end of the day, so maybe I just need it to keep me awake. But I think the big pieces from a housing perspective that we are looking at are really that access to housing options, that I can find a home, and that really comes to trying to get us to a vacancy rate that allows us people to move and grow within the community and allows people to come into the community as well. So that's part of trying to, incentivize or bring in new housing opportunities, but also being mindful of that affordability level. We could provide all of the housing we wanted, but if it's too expensive for, the workforce that we support here, then, who's actually living here, and we're creating transportation challenges, things like that. So really trying to look at how we think about both access and affordability from a policy level. And I think the piece that we're mindful of in implementation here on the housing side of things as well is, where do we have authority to, we're not the city's not a housing developer, right? But we have, working with housing authority, the county for tools, where can we think about the use of, policy or regulatory actions that we do have control over, TIF districts, things like that, where, if we really are looking to try to achieve housing access and affordability, that we do have some tools in place to help get some of those things in. So that's really where the housing chapter was trying to focus there. And this housing needs update has some really great data and resources in it as well that help inform us. And I think, the intent there is, this is another example from the update perspective that we're looking at. The thought there is, and I think the last one was 2020? 2018. So, that this is something that's getting updated ever so regularly until we figure out, kind of get that mix of housing that we're looking for, but it's something that we can continually update for how we might change how we're addressing the policies or directives within housing.
And just a plug, is it next month, next meeting after? No, April. Oh, April. Sorry, I thought it was coming sooner. We are going to give you an update on that housing needs update. I guess it'll be.
Yeah, the updated study is on the website, so you can peruse it at your leisure, but we'll give you a presentation at an upcoming plan commission meeting to get into it a little bit further. We've just got a lot on our plate for the next 2 months, so it's getting pushed out a little bit.
Anything on the housing side of things, questions, comments, reactions? Hopefully the missing middle is is definitely a planner term. It's an industry term from that perspective, but wanted to make sure that we were kind of recognizing that it's something that developers or things may recognize as we're coming in, but hopefully it's communicated in a manner that you all understood and could connect with in the chapter there as well.
The part about affordable housing, I was looking at one of the tables that you have, and it talks about the actual, the construction of the type of housing, and Emily and I kind of talked about this, and it's a little rougher in Wisconsin than it is in Minnesota, but I don't know if it needs to be included or suggested in the comprehensive report of the programs that people can apply for as part of affordable housing, subsidies and that kind of thing. And I don't know if that needs to be included
as a partner in like kind of the partnership piece.
Right, yeah. And maybe it didn't stand out to me.
I think there was something in there.
Was there?
about
Okay.
different-
Maybe
Different funding opportunities for comprehensive. But it's
And that would be for the-
it's worth
for the-
making sure it's included, yeah.
for the occupant themselves that they can apply for. So.
Yeah, and we can double check that too, because I think they're, just looking at it myself too, sometime, maybe there's more detail in the technical memorandum that we just want to make sure that enough detail is in the chapter itself too. So I've made myself a note just to make sure, because I think that was, those programs that are available to residents to help them find housing, not programs that aid the development of that housing, were a huge topic for us at our focus group on housing. So I think just making sure, you know, those programs are always evolving and changing, but they are highly used. So it would be a surprise to see those things go away as well. So great point.
When we talk about housing supplies, are we including the student and student residents in there as a housing unit? So there's 5,900 households.
So
I'm looking at page 6 at the technical memorandum. I know, I'm like you, I'm using paper. I just wasn't really sure when we talked about the housing study estimated a total of 5,900 households. If that was counting students or off campus.
So, and I would have to go back and double check, because this is where it gets to be a little bit of an odd. Because census, and I think they started with census numbers, and then Maxfield, the consultant that developed it, provided their own estimate. So census at its core does not include dormitories as a housing unit.
Okay.
But it does rentals.
It does, but it does rentals, so things off of campus. So institutionalized housing is where dormitories end up falling, so they get categorized in there a little bit differently.
Okay.
So I'd have to go back and look at specifically how that's referenced within the housing needs study, but those numbers there the housing needs study does look at the census estimates, and then Maxfield developed their own projection for where we're at today based on the number of building, permits and things that have been issued. So those numbers are an estimate that were developed specifically to that study.
Okay.
And then I think the piece, and I'm sure you guys will get into this too, but we do talk about, I think it's more in the housing tech memo, but some of the housing projections from housing, when we're looking at specific housing studies, we tend to have a smaller horizon that we're looking at, because it's really hard to, again, we don't know when that next market crash and things are going to be. So, but the housing numbers that are specifically in the chapter do reflect that 2022 report, which was again looked at a deeper level than the high numbers, the high level estimate that we did with the projection that came out of this population projection. I'm getting into the weeds of things. Stop me. Kendra's giving me the look. It's good. It's good. Any other reactions, comments on housing?
I guess based on what Patricia was looking at, I made some notes that it shows that we're up 200 in the last 2 years. But that doesn't really configure into any of your projections or anything else. It just simply we're up 200 housing units.
Yeah, so.
But we're only going, based on the graph, we're not going that great of a increase in future years.
So and I don't know all of the methodology that Maxfield put into how they got their projections, but again, so that growth of 200, they looked at again, what are the things that we have experienced since the housing, what are those building permit numbers? So I think there's probably, you could have some fair confidence in what those estimates are. I think the projections that they used for the next 10 years that they developed are based on an estimate that they created. So, and that's based on they did a lot of research on what is the housing market within city limits, within the greater region. And so they are looking at those trends. So there's a different level of confidence in those specific housing projections.
Steph, can I jump in a minute too, please?
Yeah.
So just on the topic of the housing projections from Maxfield, another thing to note is that Maxfield's projections is a projection we need by 2030 to return to equilibrium, which is a 5% vacancy rate. So that 0.7% vacancy rate number that we're currently at, that's way, 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 way too low. And it's driving up costs, as I'm sure you're all aware. And so these numbers that seem high of we need to build to this is not to account for really the growing population piece that I guess that might be a little confusing, but it's really just a fact of we've been underbuilt for so long that on top of that, we need to build to get to a reasonable supply of housing that we're not currently at. if that clarifies things a little bit.
Yes, we're shaking hands.
And just one other note as well, there's a little bit of a discussion on this, is that I think, Patricia, you're the one that brought up all the new housing that's going in with the Thompson annexation. That new housing has been accounted for in the 2022 study. And so the numbers are needed on top of that. So it's in addition to the almost 900 new units of housing, we then need to build that amount per year to again get to that equilibrium. So still a fairly significant dearth of housing.
Thanks, Sam. Okay. Any other housing questions, topics? Okay. Then we can jump to our agricultural, natural, and cultural resources here. So again, we tried to, this is a chapter that covers a lot of topics, and so tried to keep it in the buckets of the 3 topical areas. So at a high level, I'll start with agriculture because that's in some ways the easy one. We are our region has a lot of agricultural focus, but it's not like we have, producing farms within city limits and things of that nature. So it's a little bit of a different lens. So we made sure to reference the agricultural preservation or farmland preservation plans that the counties and the towns have, and that is important when we're thinking about how growth, occurs and changes. There's an agricultural enterprise zone and things of that nature that we have to be mindful of, but made sure to also talk about local food access in relation to agriculture here within the community. So we've got the co-op, we've got the Grow to Share community gardens that are a way for us to connect to locally grown foods, provide education about how food is grown. In much more urbanized areas, there are elementary school students that don't realize that a carrot came out of the ground and some of those things. So we already have some great things in place. So recognizing that that's a growing trend for us as well. And then of course, connecting to the university and the university farms and how all of that works together there as well. I'll hit on historic preservation and kind of that cultural resources piece as well, making sure that this section looks not only at historic preservation in its traditional sense of we have historic buildings that are protected under a variety of things. That's still very important. And we did make sure to reference the 2019 historic preservation plan that used the existing comprehensive, the current comprehensive plan and kind of revised strategies and things like that. So made sure to make reference back to that document as well, but also thinking about the more current focus on culture and supporting a welcoming environment and atmosphere and celebrating those things. But then natural resources is the other piece that I wanted to touch on here. And, as we've mentioned, the stewardship, maintenance, enhancement of resources, connection to resources is important for the community. And so I think we talked about this when we were looking at the original future land use plan and having that discussion of this concept of green corridors. And so this is a brand new introduction. There's not reference to these green corridors within your current plan. But this is a concept that started in the realm of stewardship of our natural resources. So thinking about existing resources in play that either have existing regulatory, floodplains, for example, we have that floodplain overlay, right? That regulates the development that occurs within it. So thinking about those things, but also thinking of this as a network of resources that we can provide access to and highlight as amenities within the community. So we started by identifying these green corridors as our wetland and floodplain areas, our steep slopes, and then our recreation or conservancy areas, really recognizing the existing resources that are in play today. And that's the foundational component of this green corridor kind of hatching piece, recognizing what's there. And there's a lot of it at play. The intent of from a stewardship perspective is we can't change, we have to have a floodplain. We have to have floodplain regulations. that can't change. Those are still gonna be in place. We have steep slope restrictions on how we can develop and work with those. Those are still going to be in play, but using this also as a tool when it comes to development, future development of like, how do we best work with and connect to these green corridors, but then also how might we be able to connect and further enhance this network of resource areas as well. And part of that comes in with thinking about it as a way for us to connect recreation. Recreation is one of our primary tools for connecting us to our natural resources. And so thinking about future loops and connections from a trail perspective and things of that nature as well. So, I think one piece for us in thinking about how this ties to development is if we have somebody that comes in with a residential subdivision, out here in this, in this area, how do we, is there an opportunity for us to make connections? Where are they gonna put their green space? Do they, where are they gonna put their stormwater ponds and things of that nature? How do we connect that to these existing green corridors and resource areas that we can continue to enhance and grow this infrastructure system? Am I missing anything from the overview? Okay. So I think, that kind of covers, I'm, trying to keep it to the point, but some higher level components there as well. Let me just make sure I'm not missing anything. Oh, we wanted to also make sure that resiliency is talked about through this chapter as well, and thinking about particularly from a, how important our resources are for future sustainability and things of that nature. So this is resiliency more in terms of the natural environment, but what are some of those tools that we have in place to continue to be thinking about this good stewardship of these resources, reducing our urban heat island effect with tree preservation policies and some of those things. So making sure that we were thinking about sustainability and resiliency as it relates to our natural resources as well.
You ready?
Yeah.
So I've got a couple.
Okay.
On page 5 of the natural resources, something that's not mentioned is we have access to 3 different aquifers, and many communities only have one. We've got the Jordan, the Prairie du Chien, and the St. Lawrence. And I think that's a natural resource that should be mentioned.
Okay.
Our city designations, we also are the monarch city. That's also on page 5.
Okay.
Then I'm not sure how this works. So it goes 10. So then I guess this is the technical. Page 3 is talking about agriculture. And when we're talking about the Man Valley Farm, which is 475 acres, listed on the farm features is not that there's cropland. It talks about the beef and dairy and the sheep and the pavilion, but they're also growing crops out there. If anyone else wants to talk, go ahead. I don't want to be. Because I work for the state and we go through bias training all the time. On page 2 of the technical memorandum, we talk about cultural resources, also includes a celebration of the current population and the history and traditions they celebrate. And I think that should be we celebrate, not that. It talks about the Winnebago, the Chippewa, the Powhatan, but it talks about what they celebrate. So then you're automatically saying you're different than us. You're
Sure.
they, we're us.
You're in the technical.
Yeah, it's resources and strategy tools. And right, it's number 2. There's a 12. Yeah. Because there's a 12 and then there's all of a sudden a 2. And it's right, we talk about the.
Okay. I think it's maybe just a page number.
It's just beyond the photos, the black and white forms, just a couple pages past that.
Okay. And then on page 10, it's under resiliency. It says the city of River Falls continues to grow its sustainability and resiliency efforts to plan for a better tomorrow. The city became the first in the state to power all city buildings with 100% renewable energy. That's not true. Our buildings aren't powered by that. We pay other people, we buy other people's renewable, like this building has gas. It's not powered by renewable energy.
Sure.
Although this is the first, that should be also mentioned, this is the first LED city hall to be built. We're certified as an, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a big deal, because that was a long time ago. We were doing that, and that's all I have in agriculture.
Well, I think you can just reword it to say that our buildings use renewable electricity.
Our energy is offset. The energy use of our buildings is offset by purchase of green energy blocks.
Sure.
Is exactly what happens, so.
Okay. Any other comments, notes within ag, natural, cultural resources? Okay. Perfect. Then let's jump to economic development, which is our chapter 5 here as well. So there's lots of great things already happening in economic development, and really the focus here from where we're wanting to put our energy in providing tools was really around small and local business support. We're doing great things. We don't need to change the attraction efforts that we're doing for bringing new businesses into the community, but we wanted to make sure, and this was particular to some of the comments that we heard in the early engagement, is making sure that it's great for us to bring new in, but we want to make sure that there are the tools and resources to support who's already made investments in the community. So, part of that even gets back to the home occupation piece as well. Somebody wants to put they're an attorney and they want to put their office in whatever that might be. Tupperware person, or can you buy Tupperware parties anymore? I don't know. I just had a Pampered Chef party, so but I Greta on our team asked what Pampered Chef was, and then I felt really so, Pampered Chef, okay, then I feel okay about myself. So making sure that we have tools and considerations in there, and then particularly from workforce development and attraction is key. That's just something that we heard a lot of in our focus groups, as well as who do we have? It's great for us to bring in and attract these businesses, but if we don't have employees to operate and make them successful, we've got some issues in there as well. So making sure that we were specifically thinking about those two areas as kind of focus and emerging topics for us, but not losing sight of the great work that we continue to do in corporate park expansion and, already thinking about what the next one is. Yeah.
Well, if I can give just a little real world example of that, I went to the River Falls EDC had an event at Tattersall last night, and I went to it, and Vice President from Turnkey was one of the people to talk about, their business, and he went on to sing the city's praise, and he hasn't been there for all that long, but he and his wife moved from the state of Oregon, after having been invited to work for Turnkey, and talked about coming to the city and how friendly it was, and also all the great ways that their business wants to be part of the community and everything. But in talking to him after his little presentation, he and his wife are actually living in Roberts because they couldn't find a place in River Falls. So I'm very appreciative of the city isn't able to live in.
Yeah.
And he's vice president.
They've talked about as well, having young people that work for them can't live here. They're having issues living here. They've talked about that before.
So, but yeah, and, I can't remember what her first name is, Valentine is her last name, who's, started Oso Cleaners. Also talked about, working with the city.
Yeah, and I think for communities of this size, I think it's very common to hear that I grew up here, I loved here, I had to move away to grow, and then I could come back when I, was in a different life state, and a lot of that is just because of either the work that's there or the ability to afford to live in a space for that phase of your life. So that really does get to that workforce development piece as well. And, we made sure the fact that you have 2 universities, within the community as well. What a great opportunity from a entrepreneur startup, harnessing those opportunities there too.
Is there a way we can cultivate more retail, clothing stores, shoe stores, just places where people would want to come and like Hudson or there is a way or there isn't a way?
I mean, when there's a will, there's a way, but it's the market, it's all about where you want to spend your time and resources. And part of it is, what does the city have the ability, how much of a developer do you want to be as a community? And I think the hard part is you can bring it here. It does not, how much is it going to get used in some of those things too. So that's a hard, you can try is the piece, but.
Well, this one part says 37% purchase 10 to 30 miles away. So can't we get that 30, and then 27% purchase 10 miles away? So you would think that you could, if you're trying to grow this community and you want people to be happy here and you've got the connectivity, why is it okay that a total of 64% of the people leave here when it's like, what can we do to get people to build your stuff here so people, the 67% of the people aren't leaving here to go shopping?
Well, I think we already do everything we can to help people that want to build a business, but nobody wants to do those businesses anymore. It's impossible. You can't afford to do small businesses like that. I mean, brick and mortar, just, it's too expensive.
And the other thing is, don't we really kind of have a problem with, even if we, wanted a bigger box,
Right.
which could maybe survive, we don't really have the terrain to do that, right? And in a way, I mean, if you look at the spaces that are available and the way we have just the slopes and the kind of space that they need, the retailer, the larger retailer probably looks at the community and says, that's not possible to find a place.
We're so close to, I mean, it used to be, take whatever store you want to, Target, Walmart, any of those stores, Kmart, they built on every corner. It didn't matter if there was 1 mile away, they built another.
Yeah.
Now, they're within 20, 30 miles of each other and they won't, and that's.
Well,
And
Amazon.
there again, like you say, brick and mortar, it's so expensive to build now.
Although
They can't find help.
one thing to be aware of, if we can like catch up with housing and have like a denser core, that's gonna make it more attractive for, the kind of like, look at that, the little boutiques and stuff that they've got.
I just see 64% of this money just going north. And it's like, that just seems,
That's the people that travel, or, they leave for work.
Yeah,
So they stop on the way home.
well, that's me. That's because they can't come here and get a pair of shoes.
And most of them do 80% of their shopping online anyways.
I try to shop at Ace.
Well, yeah. It's just, I don't know, it's such a different climate out there now. It's just, it's really.
Yeah, that's one thing that economic development here or anywhere.
And everybody's going through it.
Because the effects of the pandemic are still.
And we're not a Hudson. They're on a major thoroughfare. They got a huge attraction right in their front yard, that people swarm to.
I mean, I work in Hudson, so it's interesting listening to this because I'm so torn. How do they have 8 restaurants in a 2-block radius? And, I work at a retail store and I see a lot of River Falls folks up there shopping and buying goods that they can't get in town, but they could have gone further. So it just, I sit and listen and I put in perspective of being in a whole different community right on the main street. And it's like,
And it's a regional thing.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe, you know, it might be that Hudson develops to like, you know, the little boutiques and stuff but Timber where you come to, you know, get on your bike
and be here because I've had people come in downtown Hudson that live up on the hill and never knew that store was there. They've been there for I don't know years. Because it's like two different cities. So that's, you know, it's like kind of reminds me of the North End versus downtown. So, but you know, it's how do you get them to come 9 miles further because we're prettier and we have a river.
And I think
stuff.
that identity and sense of place is a key piece to being very thoughtful and careful about not having a Target and a Walmart and a Lowe's and a home. Like then you do there's a very different, the view that you have of Hudson is drastically different than the sense of community that you have here in River Falls. And so you have to be careful on what that balance is because they all make shifts. And I'm not saying that Hudson is bad, but it's just it's different, very different. So.
Yeah, they're, you know, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Street and their old part of town are big dollar houses that are all refurbished instead of turning into 4 classes for college students. You know, that's a big difference of how they've redeveloped and refurbished their older parts of town. Yeah.
Awesome. Well,
you can buy shoes there, Patricia.
I know. I bought these shoes there. I kind of miss a Shopko. I don't want a big box store, but I do kind of miss just a place to go walk with the grandkids and let them look for an hour.
Sure.
And say, wasn't that fun?
Okay, then let's move to transportation here. And so a big piece of this is we want to make sure that we are bringing in the bike and pedestrian plan. So lots of great work done. So making sure that that's emphasized, but also looking at all modes of transportation. So walking, rolling, and biking, that's in that bike and pedestrian plan, but moving by personal vehicle, public transportation, freight and things as well. So, you know, a couple of new things in here that we are looking at or kind of or emphasis areas are our community transit options. We heard a lot about if I don't own a car and I don't feel safe walking or biking, how do I move throughout the community? And so we tried to look at what some of those transit options might be. We aren't a community that's going to probably be able to support fixed route transit for some time until we, you know, grow in mass and things of that nature. So what are the different options that can grow beyond the current taxi service that we have available? So there's reference to Grand Rapids, Minnesota is the current model for rural autonomous transit. So they have it's a pilot program that's going on right now where there's an autonomous vehicle that has a fixed route that they use that you can, with the app, say I want to be picked up here and dropped off there. And, you know, so that's growing. So we made sure to reference things like that. Grand Rapids is a very similar size and context to River Falls. Of course, we've got Wisdom versus MnDOT and all of those things. But anyway, so looking at what some of those potential options might be there. We also made sure that we wanted to think about those regional connections. So one thing we heard particularly from the student body is, you know, how do I get to the airport? How do I get to the Mall of America? Or how do I, you know, even get to Hudson to be able to go buy my new pair of shoes or things like that if I want to actually try them on versus having to see if they fit when they come from Amazon, things of that nature. So we wanted to really be thinking about what some of those options are. And there's lots of talk about those regional connections. How do we, those high-speed connections between Minneapolis and Madison or Chicago, and, you know, how do we become a part of that conversation where, you know, hey, River Falls, Hudson, this region is here where it's not in Eau Claire, and, you know, some of those things. So trying to make sure we're thoughtful of those. And then the last piece that I wanted to hit on is the city loop concept here as well. So from continue to bring forward that spirit of connectivity. We went through and looked at what are some of the key destinations and areas that we can connect to the transportation system. And so we've identified kind of 3 networks here that utilize our existing infrastructure and build upon the recommendations of the bike and pedestrian plan. So these are intended to be areas that can be emphasized through wayfinding, through design as a way to, if I'm gonna want to take a loop through the community, this is where I go, or this is how I can connect to key destinations within the community. So we start with our yellow city loop that's really meant to really encapsulate the core of the community that we have in here today. These are areas that are in our bike and pedestrian plan, have some really great infrastructure to support movement by all modes of transportation and safely from that perspective. So we wanted to have I think it's like a 2.5 mile loop from that perspective. So if you wanted to, run a 5K, you could run that loop twice, or, things of that nature. But it's also something that as a visitor coming to the community is a way for that I could move and I could see a lot of the different things that the community has to offer, things of that nature. We also then wanted to expand that secondary loop to think about kind of that next section of the community. So we kind of expand around campus as a way to, move around, but then also on the north side of Division there, provide another connection, get us up to Tattersall and some of those things to make sure that we were emphasizing that connection back into the core. So kind of from that perspective, so that's what our blue network does there. And then our loop connectors really are looking at this point, areas where we can connect existing development areas back into the core as well. So these are all areas that have, that are emphasized with improvements within our bike and pedestrian plan as well, but are highlighted here in the transportation chapter, not only because there's improvements that we can bring, but there's also extra things we can put into place, like the great wayfinding work that we're already doing as we're looking to implement things there. We could have some additional wayfinding on to really enforce this city loop concept and things of that nature. And there are also things that help us to overlay the green corridors when we're thinking about those recreational components and some of those things. But, in many ways, these could become drivers for economic development as well. If I'm going to have a new coffee shop, I want to be on that city loop corridor because that's how people are moving and connected.
So is it the idea to have some kind of continuity in the mode of travel on these? I mean, it should be the same experience if I'm on any part of these areas if I'm on a bike, or is that kind of the idea that we would to kind of develop that, or?
It's more that these are emphasized as areas that are really safe for all types of movement. Right now, there are some differences in the recommendations of that infrastructure in the bike and pedestrian plan. So it's a slightly different treatment, but there is that specific infrastructure that supports movement by all of those modes. And then is it also an opportunity, again, from a sense of place perspective too, if these are areas where we want to emphasize future pedestrian lighting with a great, banner sign for River Falls, or, some of those ways to emphasize community identity as well.
This loop connector that goes down Radio Road, now with Man Valley being developed, won't there be heavy duty vehicles going down Radio Road to get onto the highway and go out? So would that still be a safe place for people? Yep, okay.
Yes, yep, because, and I can't remember the exact infrastructure improvement type that's identified in the bike and pedestrian plan, but that is
Shared use.
shared use traffic, okay. Too many specific things to keep in my little brain, but, so there is infrastructure in that plan to support to get.
So that would be built out as Man Valley's being built up. Okay.
Yeah. So, and that is an important connection, particularly with Sterling Farms to, come back and.
Well, yeah, and all the new developments right there
Yeah,
too.
wanted to make sure that that was highlighted in there as well. And, maybe down the road, there's a bigger loop that comes in on the north side, but making sure that we could provide a connection back in.
And why aren't we utilizing Paulson Road from the highway? What, I mean, it obviously was not used, so why isn't it? Yeah, why is that? Because all the development is there, and then that gets you, seems like pretty safe into downtown instead of going that way, but.
Yeah, so I think, again, the bike, because I had that conversation, question to Ultra,
Okay.
with the bike and pedestrian, but yes, we have some existing infrastructure in there, but it's particularly what that what we have available to us right here and kind of some of there's a lot of activity and traffic in this area
Okay.
and providing more of the ability for us to provide dedicated facilities that fit within the existing infrastructure. Obviously here there's nothing there, right? So it's
Yeah,
an
so
opportunity, but it was harder to overcome how things are currently designed and be able to fit it in without some broader, some bigger investment.
You have to
So,
redo policy.
Paul, right?
Paulson.
Also, up along the White Hill.
okay. Any questions, other comments on the loop or transportation in general?
Both sides. Yeah. And they're getting rid of all those ash trees. It's gonna be
Or ash trees?
Yeah.
We were just, I was just pointing out that. we
Oh,
have
bunch,
to look
bunch,
at
bunch.
lots of- There's parking on both sides, no sidewalk on the south. And if you've ever on a Saturday morning tried to ride your bike, move it.
Or
Right out.
especially when there's baseball or football going on at the high school.
And it just doesn't seem like it's a thoroughfare a lot at certain times
to
of the
walk.
week.
Yeah, I mean, just to walk.
So that's,
Yeah.
that's, it's on there, but I'm looking at that stretch and thinking, well, if we're gonna kind of look at it as a city loop, we might need to look at how parking is on there. So.
Okay. Well, we've got 3 chapters left. So thanks for hanging in here with us. But let's go to our utilities and community facilities. So kind of some focus areas here. And I think the big piece is what comes next. Like this is a key implementation action for us, as I mentioned, to go and do that infrastructure planning. Now that we've had, this is how we want our new guidance for growth. What does that mean from an infrastructure perspective? So here we're, referencing and talking about the utilities that we have in place today, and then also making sure that we're thinking about we've kind of, some of that was alluded to in the resource chapter too about the sustainability or resilience initiatives with our existing infrastructure, but continuing to think about making sure that our infrastructure where we can is sustainable, resilient, built, that we're, we're being thoughtful about the investments we're making so that we're not undersizing things and having to redo things and building things that can withstand change and things of that nature as well. So I know, Patricia, you have some.
Yeah, were you done? Okay, so these all have to do, as I say, I was short. These all have to do with the hydropower and the treatment of that in here. On page 2, there is this little thing, water, wastewater, and then electrical utility. And the hydropower does create 1.5 million kilowatt hours. And it's a very large producer of energy, which we use, and it's not even mentioned. So I thought, that would be something to add to there. What's this one? There were in the Kinney Corridor Plan, we talk about replacing the lost renewable energy by dam removal. And I don't know, the Kinney Corridor talks about it, but I don't know if that's something that we're looking at. It would be about, well, we've already lost Powell Falls, so that's 500 to 800,000 kilowatt hours. And then again, the 1.5 million when Junction Falls goes. That could be, through conservation too, I think, which we talk about in there. Oh, this is in housing. Now again, it goes to mine goes from 10, it's educational facilities, and then all of a sudden I'm on page 2, community facilities and services. But under infrastructure and growth, it says assuming a consistent 2.4 people per household, the community will need an additional 2,600 housing units by 2045. Is that from as of the date of the comp plan or from 2020? If you know. I'm just like, where are we starting to add these
Yeah, so from 2020.
from 2020,
Yeah.
okay. And then the page 7 of the technical, again, it has to do with, we talk about our community solar and the fact that we're all big on purchasing the green energy, but again, hydropower is not mentioned. And it's gonna be with us for a while, so, and if we're looking at this plan every 10 years, I think the hydropower should be mentioned as, along with these 2 other things on page 7.
Well, potentially, it's gonna be with us.
Yeah,
I mean,
Yeah,
it's
it's the plan.
a current resource.
yeah,
I think you could say that much, but
yeah.
and that's kind of more a policy thing. I don't know that has to do with, I know, I'm not sure how much that affects the comprehensive plan.
Well, the other 2 are mentioned, and you know, so
Okay, yep.
it's like the other 2 are mentioned. I assumed it was for a purpose, so. And then that's it on that one.
Any other thoughts, comments on utilities and community facilities? Okay,
And just kind of another random thing, it's like, you know, just talking to my friends in other municipalities, it's like, oh, I'm so glad we have municipal utilities. You know, it gives us a lot of power to help shape the community in ways that you don't have to deal with Excel.
sure.
Well, and I complained earlier about we have this thing, I can't remember what it's called, right? APC or whatever, that was huge. It went from 37 cents to $26, but now it's right back down again.
Sure.
So it's like there is that pain, but yet we still have the power and the control over when we raise prices and when we don't. And we don't with Xcel Energy.
Yes. Yeah.
Or Xcel.
Okay, then recreation, so again, that new plan element, so trying to make sure that we're bringing in the recommendations and process from the outdoor recreation plan. We also wanted to make sure that the Kinney Corridor Plan, the focus on recreation, is brought into the chapter as well. But thinking about recreation so outdoor recreation plan focuses right on outdoor recreation, so thinking about some of our indoor recreation opportunities as well. As we've mentioned, community center is mentioned in both documents as well, but thinking about the concept of recreational tourism that already exists and making sure that we're building from that opportunity. That's something that's bringing people to the community and helping them spend, they're maybe not buying their shoes here, but they're having a drink at Tattersall and filling up their gas tank. So it's bringing them to the community, helping from that perspective as well. And then also making sure that we recognize the public health components. We don't, public health is a soft component that doesn't really get talked about within a comprehensive plan, but really that's a key piece from a sense of identity. Access to a high quality of life is our ability to recreate, have physical health, social and mental health. So wanting to just emphasize the additional benefits that recreation has for our community members as well. So thoughts, comments, edits on the recreation
Page
side?
2.
Okay.
It says the River Falls is home to 328 parks and recreation spaces. I'm like going, well, maybe there's, I don't know what you're calling recreation spaces. If everyone has a.
And whether that, because we have, as a result of the changes we made in our direct plan, there's now 28 parks, but I don't know if that's that error or if it's acres is the word that's missing.
I think there's over 400 acres. I just think it probably should be 28 instead of 328.
Yes, agreed.
We can dream.
Yeah.
Was that in the chapter or the?
That's right, it's page 2 of recreation.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Scott Morris, that would have worked.
Show them.
Okay, yeah.
You said that. I heard it getting calculated, because I was at 300.
Well, it's correct on page 3. It says 28.
Yeah.
Yes. Any other recreation?
We brought this up before, on page 3, it talks about identifying parks and establish park standards for each park type. create a consistent design and amenity offering across parks of the same type. And I've been pushing that regional parks, to me, should have a flushing bathroom, toilet, and a water fountain. But some of them don't, and I understand that, but if we're gonna establish park standards, I would like to see that if you're going to a regional park, you're gonna be able to go to the bathroom and have a drink of water.
It's part of why we're gonna establish those standards.
There you go.
Hey. Perfect. Well, then the last one here is our intergovernmental cooperation chapter. So here there's, I think kind of the message out of this one is that we recognize that we have to collaborate and partner with others in order to achieve success. And so the intent of this chapter is to really identify, who those partners are, where we can work together, and then what some of the tools that we have in place. Also recognizing that connection back to the community through a discussion of community engagement. There are a lot of people that invested time in this process, in the Kinney Corridor process, and things of that nature. So wanting to continue to involve the community as we're implementing this plan as well. The community has every ability to, have every ability to be a part of that as well. So what are some of the tools we have in place, but implementation actions get specific in here in terms of like some of our cooperative agreements with the school district or others to provide resources, or the planning tools that we have in place with our towns and things of that nature. So kind of looking at what some of those tools are as well. So any comments, thoughts on that last chapter of intergovernmental?
Like Rebecca mentioned, it's funny, but colors and little designs, they help you understand what's going on so quickly without having this list or bullet points or something. You look at a picture, oh, okay, I see what, that's just really helpful.
Excellent. Yeah, I was telling Amy and Kendra at separate times, but we tried to, the technical memorandum takes out a lot of meat that would have otherwise kind of bared down some chapters. And it was surprising to me that some of these chapters ended up with a higher page number than I was expecting them to in this format change. But some of the graphics and things like the table you were just referencing, otherwise would have been a bulleted list that only took up a half page, but now it's a lot easier for people to connect and understand. So there's a trade-off there, and it's okay if we've got a couple extra pages if it's more readable and understandable too. So great. Okay. Well, with all of that being said, again, I think we've got some work to do on making some updates, but of course, this is still, when we're entering and talking with the public, there's still opportunities for change. There's nothing written in stone, ever with a comprehensive plan, but there's still opportunity for change. So if you go home tonight and are thinking about things, reach out to us, let us know. We're going to be working on updates here over the next week. But just to kind of get you thinking about what happens next here as well. So again, as I mentioned, bike and pedestrian plan, outdoor rec are already available in hard copy and on Engage RF. Comprehensive plan will also be available on the 6th of February. We have already planned the open house and celebration for February 9th. That will be here in the lower level. Remind me of times.
4:30 to 6:30.
4:30 to 6:30. So we will be talking about all three plans at that time. And then we'll be closing, oops, I forgot to update this, closing the comment period on February 26th. So giving people the weekend, we'll close it, everything online when we come into the office on Monday morning. So giving people, that 20-day window to read and react to things. Of course, they could already be reading and reacting to the two plans that are available. What we will be doing, and I kind of get into this in the next slide, we'll have surveys and engagement opportunities for people to provide specific comments on all three of the plans. They will be available via Engage RF in the online format that we've used before, or also in physical form. So if they went to the library and looked at the plan, there would be a physical opportunity for them to write down from that perspective. We will be collecting all of that feedback through that 20-day comment period, and then we will be working with staff to say, here's some things that we found out from the public. Here's some common themes. Where do are there themes that emerge that we need to really revise how we're looking at policy, or maybe we just need to make, some little updates here and there. So the intent between the 26th of February and when we release the plan for you for review is that we are addressing those public comments. So the plan that you will have in front of you on March 7th will have kind of two things happen, where we will make small minor updates that are addressed through public comments. We'll just make those and we will let you know what updates were made. But if there are some bigger policy things that the public has, called to attention and we need to change, we will talk about those with you as part of your action on the comprehensive plan. So if those things are in play, we might end up in a situation where we talk about it. The motion that is made, would be a recommending approval contingent upon the update of the recreation chapter to do X, Y, and Z. Could be the case. It could be also, I won't go down that road, but so with the intent that we then are bringing the plan forward, so if we did need to make some changes, we'd make those and bring all three plans then to the council on the 28th for their final action there as well.
So the public hearing is on March 7th. With the plan commission as well. So
It's looking like a really full agenda that night. So we've got a number of planning applications in addition to.
What's a quorum? Because I will not be in town.
Well,
I can maybe call in.
Normal eye on the 7th of March.
I think we can accommodate you remotely. Make sure we have a quorum. If you can't be accommodated remotely, if you're on an island somewhere, that is totally acceptable. But if you're, willing to be
We need
available.
4 of us.
Okay,
I'll be good. I'll be
All we need
here.
is 4.
okay.
I'm boring, I don't believe
It's a spring break.
Oh, okay.
For my wife teaches and that's.
Yeah, anytime you get into March.
I think I can get online. I just don't know if I have the connection. So. Who let you up?
you should.
No, you have to be.
We're just we'll take the plan commission meeting to Mexico instead.
I know, let's vote for, I make a motion to vote for Chris to be here.
Excellent. Well, any questions on what February is including for us or anything like that? So
Do we meet again outside of plan commission, this group? Okay. I will.
So, and we do, please come back and join us on the 9th here too. The intent is that it's an open house where we can communicate, but we're also, want to have some treats and celebratory things with the community as well, because this is an exciting.
And please find your hat. And
At the first open house, I was wearing my hat, we had to wear masks. He's like, who are you? I think it's Patricia.
Well, to that point too, you've had a number of extra meetings over the past 18 months, so thank you.
Yes.
Sticking with it and being diligent and good process. So.
What's next? Yeah, remember the quarter thing, and that was this, what's next? Plan commission thing.
What's the next big one?
Emily's got a long list for you.
Well, and you'll see me again, but I really do appreciate all of your input and insight. You guys are great to work with, and so I really appreciated getting to know you all.
And I always want to help you with this. We'll sit in the side
Yeah.
for it.
I mean, it's very distinct. I'm like, oh.
Just for students. They cost us a lot.
Yeah, sometimes I like.
Yeah.